That night, the snow fell heavier than my heart. I was 17, standing on the front porch of our 2-story house in Portland, Oregon, barefoot and shaking. My father's voice still echoed in my head, louder than the wind. "You've disgraced this family, Julia." My mother's face was pale and trembling, but not from love or worry, from fury. The secret I'd tried to hide for months, that I was pregnant, had turned into the weapon they used to destroy me. The ultrasound photo that once made me cry tears of hope now lay torn in half on the icy ground. My father hurled my suitcase out the door, and my mother locked it behind me. The metallic click sounded like the end of everything I'd ever known. "Please, Mom," I begged, clutching my coat over my growing belly. "I'll finish school. I'll work. I just need—" "You need to leave," she said sharply, eyes cold as the porch light. "You've made your bed. Now lie in it." One. The street was silent except for the crunch of snow under my feet. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peeked through her window blinds. I could see her silhouette shaking her head, like watching a scandal unfold on live TV. My breath turned to mist as I whispered, "Don't look at me like that. I didn't commit a crime. I just loved someone." But love was a sin in my parents' house, at least when it wasn't the kind they could control. My father once said, "A Whitmore never begs." That night I broke that rule. I begged on my knees. And still, the door never opened. I walked until the streetlights ended. My fingers went numb. My tears froze before they could fall. I found an old bus station downtown, empty except for a flickering vending machine and a bench that smelled like rust and rain. That became my shelter. As I sat there, I could still feel my baby move faintly inside me, tiny, fragile, innocent. I pressed my palm against my belly and whispered, "It's okay. I'll protect you. I'll get us through this." But I was 17, homeless and invisible. I thought about the college applications sitting on my desk back home, the acceptance letter I'd never open, the prom dress I'd never wear. My life had collapsed in one night, and the people who were supposed to catch me had thrown me into the storm instead. I didn't sleep. I watched the buses come and go until dawn painted the city in gray. For the first time in my life, I realized something brutal. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by who stays when everyone else walks away. That night, they didn't just kick me out of the house. They kicked me out of their hearts. But as the snow melted on my face, one thought burned brighter than the cold. One day, they'll remember the name they tried to erase. Comment prompt: if you were in Julia's place that night, would you beg to stay or walk away with pride? The first night on my own felt endless. The bus station floor was cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question if you're even still alive. I tucked my knees against my chest, pulled my thin coat tighter, and tried to make myself invisible. Around me, people came and went, travelers, drifters, the broken ones. I was one of them now. Every few hours, the intercom voice echoed, "Next bus to Seattle boarding in 10 minutes. I didn't have a ticket. Just a half-eaten granola bar and 12 crumpled dollars in my pocket. I watched the buses pull away, wondering if freedom was waiting at the next stop or if every city was just another place to be unwanted. When morning came, I walked to a convenience store a few blocks away. The clerk's eyes fell on my stomach, and his polite smile faded. "We don't need trouble here," he said when I asked if they were hiring. Trouble. That's what I had become, a walking scandal in a borrowed hoodie. By the second week, I stopped counting days. I lived off cheap soup cans and whatever change strangers dropped in the vending machine slots. My reflection in the bus station mirror scared me, pale skin, swollen eyes, a girl who looked twice her age. Sometimes I pressed my hand to my belly, whispering softly, "I'm still here. You're still here. That's all that matters." Then came the night I fainted. One moment, I was standing near the restroom sink, and the next, I woke to fluorescent lights blinding my eyes. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose. I was in a public hospital somewhere near Seattle. A nurse leaned over me, her name tag read, H. Bowen. She asked, "Honey, how far along are you?" Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held pity, the kind that hurts more than cruelty. Hours blurred into days. Machines beeped, nurses came and went. I was too weak to move, but I could feel my baby still kicking inside me. It was the only proof I wasn't completely alone. Until one night, the kicking stopped. When I woke again, the room was quiet, too quiet. I looked to the side. The incubator that once held my baby was empty. The nurse didn't have to say it. I knew. I screamed until my voice cracked, but no one came. Grief isn't loud. It's the silence that follows when no one answers your cries. They handed me a piece of paper that read, "Infant, Baby Whitmore." That was all the world ever recorded of my child, 2 words, typed and official. No name, no memory, just a line on a form. That night, I sat by the hospital window, watching snowflakes fall against the glass. I made a promise to the tiny soul I'd lost. You won't be forgotten. I'll build something out of this pain, something that lasts longer than the people who left me. Lie. And for the first time since being kicked out, I didn't cry. I burned. I spent 3 days in that hospital after losing my baby. No one came. No calls, no family, no flowers. Just the sound of heart monitors from other rooms and the smell of bleach that never left the air. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was it, if my life had already ended at 17. Then, on the 4th morning, she walked in. A nurse with silver hair pulled into a bun. Lines on her face that spoke of both kindness and war. Her name tag read, Margaret Bowen. But everyone in the ward called her Maggie. She didn't ask what I'd done or why I was alone. She just placed a tray on my lap, real food, not hospital mush, and said, "You look like someone who hasn't been treated gently in a long time." For some reason, those words cracked something in me. I started crying, not the polite kind, but the messy, shaking kind. She didn't interrupt. She just sat there, holding my hand while I fell apart. When I finally stopped, she said quietly, "You're not broken, Julia. You're just unguarded. There's a difference." Over the next week, Maggie visited me every day. She talked about the world beyond those walls, the people who made it, even when they started with nothing. She told me she'd been a teenage mom herself once, abandoned by her own family in Kansas. "They called me a failure," she said with a wry smile. "So I became a nurse and helped more people than they ever will. That's my revenge." Something in that word revenge stirred inside me. Not the kind that burns others, but the kind that builds a fire in your chest and says, "Watch me rise." When I was discharged, Maggie refused to let me walk out alone. She drove me to a small shelter on the edge of the city street, Agnes Women's Haven, a quiet, faded yellow house that smelled of coffee and soap. "You can stay here," she said. "No one will judge you. You'll work for the clinic next door in exchange for meals and a bed." For the first time in months, I slept on a mattress with clean sheets. I didn't dream of snow or locked doors. I dreamed of light. Weeks turned into months. I cleaned exam rooms, restocked bandages, and watched doctors treat people like they mattered. I started to feel something I hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. Purpose. Maggie noticed. One evening after closing, she handed me a pamphlet. GED Test Preparation, Adult Education Center. "You're smart, Julia," she said. "Don't let what they did decide what you become." That night, I sat by the shelter's window, holding the pamphlet like it was a ticket to another life. I whispered to myself, "They threw me out to make me disappear. I'll study until the world has to notice me." And for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt hungry not for food but for redemption. I used to think revenge meant standing over the people who hurt you and watching them fall. But as I scrubbed floors in that clinic, I realized revenge could also mean standing taller than they ever imagined you could. Days turned into a routine. I worked mornings at Street Agnes Women's Clinic, cleaned exam tables, refilled gloves, and sanitized counters until they sparkled. In the evenings, I took GED classes at a community center 3 bus stops away. Every night I came home exhausted, but it was the kind of tired that meant something. I wasn't surviving anymore, I was building. Maggie became my anchor. She tutored me after shifts, pushing me when I doubted myself. "They wanted you to be forgotten," she'd say, tapping my forehead. "So remember yourself louder." She was the first person who looked at me and saw potential instead of pity. When I finally passed my GED, I held that certificate like it was $1 million check. It wasn't paper, it was proof that I'd taken back my name. Maggie took me out to a small diner near the waterfront and toasted with cheap coffee, smiling proudly. One day, she said, "You're going to change lives." I laughed, but she wasn't joking. A week later, she told me about a scholarship for a nursing assistant program. I didn't think I could afford it, but she helped me apply anyway. Somehow, I got in. That program was brutal, 12-hour clinicals, endless exams, and nights where I studied until dawn. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered the snow that night, the look in my father's eyes when he said I'd ruined his name. That memory became fuel. At graduation, when they called my name Julia Whitmore, I felt something snap into place. I wasn't that terrified 17-year-old anymore. I was someone new. I moved to Chicago to take a job at a city hospital. The pace there was relentless trauma calls, emergencies, no room for hesitation. But I loved it. Every patient I helped reminded me that pain didn't have to end in bitterness. It could turn into purpose. Years passed. I took on extra shifts, saved every dollar, and started night classes in health administration. When my coworkers partied, I stayed in, reading business textbooks under fluorescent lights. I didn't have family cheering me on, I had ghosts whispering, "You can't do this." And every time I proved them wrong. By 27, I earned my bachelor's degree. By 29, I opened a tiny medical supply business out of a rented office no bigger than my old hospital room. It was called Whitmore Health Supplies. The name wasn't for pride, it was defiance. Every invoice, every product label carried the name they tried to bury. As I locked the office one night, city lights glinting off the glass, I smiled to myself. "You kicked me out to erase me," I whispered. "Now my name's on the building." By the time I turned 37, Whitmore Health Supplies had grown from a single desk and secondhand printer into a thriving company with contracts across 3 states. What began as a survival plan had become a symbol not just for me, but for every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough. My mornings started with conference calls, my afternoons in hospitals, and my nights reviewing reports while Chicago's skyline glowed outside my window. I didn't have time for bitterness anymore. Success had drowned out the noise of the past. But the truth was, I didn't chase money, I chased meaning. After years of watching women like me struggle, I founded the Haven Project, a nonprofit that offered scholarships, housing, and counseling to young mothers abandoned by their families. Every story I heard reminded me of that bus station floor, of the girl who once begged for warmth. I swore that no one would ever feel that alone again. One night, at the grand opening of our new Haven Center, reporters asked how it felt to be an inspiration. I smiled and said, "I'm not an inspiration. I'm a warning that you can't bury someone who knows how to grow from the dirt." That quote went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't just a CEO, I was a voice for resilience. Magazines called me the angel of the abandoned. Invitations poured in for conferences, TED Talks, even a feature in Forbes Health Edition. Still, amid all the lights and applause, I sometimes thought of my parents. I wondered if they ever read those articles, if they recognized my last name on the company billboards that lined the interstate. Did they ever regret that night? Or did they still think of me as their disgrace? I never reached out. Some ghosts are better left haunting the silence. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an old real estate agent in Portland. "Dr. Whitmore," she said. "The county is auctioning an old hospital property. Looks like it's been shut down for years. I thought you might be interested. It's not far from where you grew up." My heart skipped. Portland. The city that had both destroyed and birthed me. Something inside whispered, "Go back." I flew there 2 weeks later. The building was crumbling, the walls peeling, but I saw potential where others saw decay. I bought it that day, not for profit, but for closure. We would turn it into Whitmore Care Hospital, a place that healed instead of judged. As I signed the deed, snow began to fall outside the window. It looked just like that night 20 years ago. But this time, I wasn't the girl crying in the storm. I was the woman who owned the building the storm had once buried her in. I whispered under my breath, "This city once threw me away. Now, it'll carry my name." It happened on a gray Thursday morning. I was reviewing patient reports in my office at Whitmore Care Hospital when my assistant, Marissa, knocked on the door. Her voice was careful, almost hesitant. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, "we just admitted 2 emergency cases. Elderly couple. They're under your last name." My pen froze midair. "Whitmore?" I repeated, forcing a small laugh. "It's a common name." She shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, ma'am, but the woman said your first name." She asked for Julia. My chest went tight. For 20 years, I had built walls so high I thought the past could never find me. But somehow, it had walked straight into my hospital. I went to the ER, my heart pounding. Through the glass door of room 214, I saw them, my parents. My father, Thomas, lay pale and trembling, a stroke monitor beeping softly beside him. My mother, Evelyn, sat by his bed, her once perfectly styled hair now gray and thin. She was clutching his hand, whispering prayers. When she turned and saw me standing there, her mouth fell open. "Julia," she breathed, her voice cracking like old glass. For a second, the 17-year-old in me screamed to run. But the woman I had become, the doctor, the survivor, stood tall. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said coolly, "we'll make sure your husband receives the best care possible." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, don't call me that. I'm your mother." I let the silence hang between us. "You stopped being that a long time ago." She broke down crying. "We didn't know what else to do back then. We thought we were protecting the family's reputation. We were wrong. So wrong. Her words fell like snow too late to melt the frost inside me. As I looked at my father, hooked up to machines, I remembered the night he locked that door. The same hand that had thrown my suitcase out now lay limp, motionless. Justice, it seemed, had its own strange timing. I wanted to feel triumph. I wanted to smirk and say, "You deserve this." But instead, all I felt was a deep, hollow ache. Because no victory over your parents ever feels clean, it just reopens scars that never fully healed. "I'll make sure you're both taken care of," I said at last. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do." Evelyn reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "You taught me mercy was weakness," I whispered. "Let's see if I learned that wrong." Mason. As I left the room, Marissa caught my eye and asked softly, "Do you know them?" I smiled faintly. I used to. That night, I stood by the hospital window, looking out at the same kind of snow that had once fallen over Portland. The city hadn't changed much. But I had. They were no longer the judges of my worth. Now, they were the ones waiting for my mercy. For the next few weeks, I watched them from a distance. My parents became 2 frail shadows wandering the corridors of the hospital that bore our last name. Every nurse who passed them, every meal they received, every breath my father took was under my roof. It was poetic justice, wrapped in the scent of antiseptic and silence. The staff didn't know the story. They only saw 2 elderly patients cared for by a compassionate CEO. But behind the professional smile, my heart was a war zone. Every time I saw my mother flinch at the sound of my heels clicking down the hall, I remembered her voice saying, "You've ruined our family." And every time I saw my father struggle to speak, I remembered the sound of that lock turning, sealing me out of my own home. Late one night, I found myself standing outside their room. My father was asleep, machines humming like distant thunder. My mother looked up at me, eyes swollen and tired. "You've become everything we wanted you to be," she whispered. "Smart, respected, strong." I let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't want me strong. You wanted me silent." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "We were wrong. We see that now. Please, Julia, forgive us." Forgive. The word hit harder than any insult ever could. Forgiveness had always felt like surrender. Like giving up the one thing that kept me standing, my anger. But as I looked at them, so small and helpless, I realized something brutal. I had already won. I didn't need to destroy them. Life had done that for me. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I don't even think about you most days. That's how I know I'm free." Her lips trembled. Do you still think of the baby? My throat tightened. Every day, I said quietly. But not with pain anymore. You taught me how to survive. He taught me why. No. When I turned to leave, she called after me, voice breaking. Julia, please, just tell us you forgive us. I paused at the door, not looking back. Forgiveness isn't for you, I said. It's for me. And I've already given it. The next morning, the story broke on national news. Dr. Julia Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Care, treats her parents who once disowned her. Reporters camped outside the hospital, social media exploded, and people called me the woman who turned pain into purpose. But I didn't do it for the headlines. I did it because mercy, when wielded by the broken, cuts deeper than vengeance ever could. That night, I looked at the hospital's glowing sign, Whitmore Care, and realized what the name finally meant. It wasn't about them. It was about every soul that was ever told they didn't belong. I had turned their cruelty into compassion, their rejection into legacy, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. The night the headlines faded, I stood alone in my office, looking out over Chicago's skyline. Snow was falling again, soft, silent, endless. It reminded me of that night 20 years ago, when I stood barefoot in the cold, begging for a place to belong. Only this time, the snow didn't sting. It shimmered. A nurse knocked gently. Dr. Whitmore, your parents are being discharged tomorrow. They wanted to thank you. I nodded, but I didn't go. Some goodbyes are meant to happen without words. I'd already said mine years ago with every degree earned, every door opened, every woman I helped to stand again. The next morning, I walked into the new wing of the hospital, the Haven House. It was my favorite place on earth. Sunlight spilled through wide windows, warming the bright yellow walls. Young women sat in the lounge, reading, laughing, rocking their babies. Each of them had a story that began in darkness, just like mine. One girl, maybe 16, approached me shyly. Dr. Whitmore, she said, clutching a folded letter. I wanted to thank you. My mom kicked me out when I told her I was pregnant. I thought my life was over, but now, I'm finishing school. My son's healthy. You gave me a second chance. Her words pierced me deeper than any apology ever could. I hugged her tightly and whispered, No, sweetheart. You gave yourself that chance. I just built the door. That afternoon, during the Haven's opening ceremony, the press lined up again. Flashing cameras, applause, microphones thrust in my face. Someone asked, Dr. Whitmore, what drives you after everything you've been through? I looked at the audience, doctors, nurses, young mothers, and even strangers holding signs that read, Hope lives here. I took a deep breath and said, because no one should sleep in the rain for being brave enough to love. Because every girl who's ever been told she's ruined should know she can still rebuild. The crowd erupted into applause. But behind the noise, I felt something quieter, peace. Later that night, I returned to my office and opened my old journal. Between its worn pages was that faded hospital document, Infant, Baby Whitmore. I ran my fingers over it gently. We made it, I whispered. You and me. We turned pain into purpose. Through the glass, I saw my parents stepping into a cab outside. My mother looked up at the building, her eyes meeting mine from across the street. I didn't wave. I simply smiled, the kind that says I've let go. They had needed me to survive, and I had chosen to save them. Not because they were my parents, but because I refused to become what they were. I switched off the office light and stepped into the night. The snow fell softly on my hair, melting into warmth. For the first time, I didn't feel like that girl who'd been thrown out. I felt like the woman who had come home,